personal study materials, books, and so on.
Okay. I'll add that, but that was actually the next point here, is books. So this was mainly Shamatha in this retreat. And the book I read from was Attention Revolution from Alan Wallace. And that's an excellent book for not only Shamatha practice, because in that book there's also sections on these 4 immeasurables that we did, loving kindness, compassion, and so forth. And also he himself, Alan Wallace, does a lot of what's called dream yoga. He incorporates lucid dreaming in his practices. And so he's got a couple of chapters on that in the book as well, if you're interested. But that is a very good book for Shamatha practice. For the Vipassana practice, particularly this wisdom of emptiness, as I mentioned, How to See Yourself as You Really Are from His Holiness Dalai Lama is a very good book, introductory level. And then in terms of study programs, of course it's always good to study, but of course just study itself is not going to transform our life. But we saw these 3 wisdoms of hearing, contemplating, meditating. So hearing, contemplation, is those 2 studied. And what I see sometimes, people come into spiritual path, they either gravitate to study or to meditation and sort of forget about the other one. And then it doesn't work very well. Because only study is not going to transform our mind. I mean, we could be the smartest Buddhist scholar on the planet and be completely miserable. We need to implement. But equally well, if we just meditate and we don't study, what are we going to meditate on? How are we going to meditate? And if we have some sort of experience, what does that mean? Where am I? Is it valid, or am I just going completely off on some daydream? And so there's a saying in Tibetan Buddhism that meditating without study is like trying to climb a mountain without hands and feet. Not going to work very well. So we need to study and we need to practice. Now, how we balance those 2 elements will depend a little bit on us as an individual and also the tradition that we are following. Some traditions emphasize a lot on the meditation, of course some study, and in those traditions then you do a little bit of study, but then when you practice, generally in those traditions, for it to be effective, you have a very close connection to a personal teacher who's really guiding you very closely. Whereas other traditions emphasize a lot more on study, so you have a very good understanding of practice. And so then when you're practicing, based on that, you can be a little bit more self-reliant in terms of practice. You still would be helpful to have a teacher, of course. So it really depends a little bit on the tradition and sort of our disposition. Some people find that to really be confident in something, they have to really know it first. Otherwise, they're not sure about it. So some people find that they need to really do quite a lot of study to really be confident in what we're doing. Other people find that just by doing a little bit of study, that's enough for them to be confident. So whatever we are, then we need that confidence. Otherwise, if we're not confident and then we do some practice and we're faced with some difficulty, we'll have a lot of doubts and we'll probably give up. So in terms of study, I mean, of course, here, this is part of this Buddhism A to Z, a 7-year program. So you don't have to run away somewhere. You've got a lot of stuff here for 7 years, myself and a couple of other teachers coming. So that is a very good thing we can follow. And of course, repetition is always a good thing. So all of these, I think, events are being filmed. And so you've got access to that. So it can be very good a little bit later time to go through this again, because you'll pick up a lot more. So in between teachings, if you want to do a little bit more, then you can just review what you've just done, go through the whole thing again. So I think that's good. Any other questions?
There was another question that came up. Sorry.
Sure.
If you have some recommendations for a Sangha meeting structure.
That's a big question. I mean, it would really... I mean, one, I think, is that someone needs to be driving it. They need not maybe the smartest person, but the one who's like the moderator, the facilitator. So you need someone driving it, because otherwise, if you just have a group of people come together, you need someone driving. So someone needs to be really the driver of that. And then you need to do something that is sort of possible for people, like, you know, is once a week good, or is that too much? Every 2 weeks? So we need to have something that people can manage. And then I think it's important, like I said, you know, for that structure. So, you know, I would certainly recommend, like, maybe, again, depending on what people can manage, but if it's a weeknight and people are working, you know, doing 2 or 3 hours on a weeknight probably is way too much for people. They're too tired. So maybe just like 1 hour. And then in that hour, I would recommend some practice. Probably good to start with practice, 15-minute
Shamatha.
practice. Well, not necessarily, but, you know, you can mix that up. But certainly I would start with practice. Then I would have maybe some, whatever the structure you're going to follow, some like either listening to some audio teaching from someone very short, or something that you're covering. So you have some actual progress topics that you're moving through. So you can do that, but then I'd leave a little bit of time at the end for more general, you know, how are you going, you know, on my practice and blah, you know, so just group discussion. So I think these 3 elements is meditation, proper sort of structured discussion, and a little bit of more general, just Sangha, bonding, helping each other sort of discussion.
So can you say a bit more about the middle one?
Yeah, the middle one, well, we've got the structure here for this 7 years, so you can use that. So you can, for example, now this retreat, you could now map out over the next 3 or 6 months, not maybe go through everything because that's a lot, but you could pick out some of the core points, you know, like breath on the mind, resting in awareness. So you could have, you know, find the main points that we went through, and then also include that we could do some loving kindness, compassion. So just pick some of the main core points so that you can sort of map out for the next maybe 3 months or whatever, that these are the points we're going to go through. This week, this, so it's clear. And then at the end of that time, we have some sort of done something comprehensive. Because otherwise, if you just leave it random, again, it just falls apart. People want structure. People want to see that they're going to cover certain things, and by a certain date, they're going to complete something. That's important, to have some completion. So I wouldn't just leave it open-ended, just say, oh, well, we'll start now and we'll just keep going. That's, people lose interest.
So would you recommend to start with regarding the points that we've learned, to start as a group practicing on the rhythm of the breath for 1 month, and then rhythm of...
Well, again, it depends how often you meet together.
Yeah.
So that would be depending. I mean, if you're meeting every week, which maybe, I don't know if you can do that, but if you can meet every week, then maybe you can dedicate a couple of weeks to the same practice. But if you're only meeting once every 2 weeks or a month, I think doing like 2 months in a row on the breath, on the rhythm is, you know, it's going to be way too long. So it has to be, you'd have to adjust that depending on how often you're meeting together regularly, and also how long that session is, you know.
Yeah.
Because if it's a bit longer, which weekdays, you know, maybe you can also start with a shamatha, do some discussion, then do another like a compassion practice or something, and then a little bit more. But in an hour, to do 2 practices plus discussion and plus that, maybe it's a bit condensed. But if you're doing like an hour and a half, then I think you can do 2 meditation sessions. You know, start with Shamatha or compassion, even Glen, to get the motivation, and well, they're probably better Shamatha, and then so you can break that time of hour and a half or something into 2 little 15-minute practices, and then that. So that's it depends really on how long the sessions are and how often you're meeting, how to do that. But I think what is important is have those 3 elements: to have practice, some discussion, some actual topic that you're going through, and then a little bit more time, a little bit of time, just general sort of you know, group dynamics and helping each other a little bit. You know? Yeah.
Thank you.
Is there anywhere online that I can find a video or an audio of you giving the longer presentation about the Wheel of Life? Or if not,
Wheel of Life.
Yeah.
I do discuss that a number of places. Probably where I talk about it most would be either the 2 places where I talk about it more extensively. Probably the most extensive is when I teach the Heart Sutra. So, and Heart Sutra I teach, sometimes people ask me to do it in 2 days, 3 days, but I think I do it, the longest I do is 9 days. So if you find that, probably there, and there may be a session that's titled Wheel of Life or something like that, but there is a place there where I teach it in a little bit more extensive way.
Can I find it like this on Google or?
It's on my website.
On your website.
Which is glensvensson.org. So on there's lots of audio materials, charts. Also my schedule is there, so whenever I have arranged a retreat or teaching anywhere, I put it on there. Also there's a contact page on there, so if you want to ask me any questions, you can just send me a message anytime. So help yourself to whatever you find on the website. Any other questions? Because I've more or less finished now. Okay. Oh, yeah.
It's a more general question. I think something that happens to me after I leave retreat is my relationship to pleasure tends to be a little bit skewed. Like I tend to think I need to have less of it in my life. And so can you give some tips on how to have a mindset around?
Yeah. Pleasure. Yeah. So sometimes people sort of get the feeling like, particularly if they've done a retreat or something and they've heard about renunciation, that somehow they need to avoid pleasure. I think that's not so healthy. But of course, equally well, just getting caught up in it is also not so good. So, I mean, to find that middle way is probably not so easy, but certainly, particularly with the sort of Shamatha practice, I think it can be a little bit easier that when we go home to not sort of be trying to avoid pleasure, and we can be more present with it without getting caught up in it. So I think Shamatha practice is going to be helpful for that. And I think also this idea of Sangha. I mean, I think if we go back and, you know, most of our friends like to party and all that sort of stuff, then we jump into that, then probably it's going to be difficult, I think. So I think to give yourself a bit of time, a bit of space from that sort of party scene sort of thing, I think that's going to be helpful. And I think also to reduce our dependence on technology, because I think a lot of Facebook and all that sort of stuff is really stimulating the mind in not a very good way. So I would certainly reduce our screen time and really get more out into the physical world, into nature. I think that's going to be very helpful because I think this sort of technology just agitates the mind, whereas if we really get out in the physical world, particularly into nature, I think that can have a very calming effect on the mind. And exercise as well. Get out in nature and do some exercise. I think that's going to be very helpful. Because again, if we just go home and we start doing Facebooking and social media and watching our big plasmas, our big TV screen that we've got that's this huge, just sort of watching movies, and I think this is going to sort of destroy a lot of the benefits that we've received here. So I would certainly, reduce that as much as possible. And in the evening, don't just sort of, often what people do, of course, is they've had a busy day, they get home, flop on the couch and just flick the TV on and just sit there, and it's just like for about 2 hours in the evening. I mean, this is not going to be helpful. So, leave the TV off, unless it's some very educational, informative thing, but just watching sort of, soapies and all that, that's not really going to be very helpful. So I certainly would, particularly in the evening, is really, for at least an hour or two before we go to bed, is just don't use a laptop, don't use a mobile phone, don't watch TV, because it really has quite a strong negative impact on sleep in general as well. So for at least an hour or two before bed, technology free, completely, really. I mean, you see people in bed like doing this, and they wake up at 2 o'clock, they get the phone and start doing this. I mean, this is a disaster. It's a disaster. I mean, and also with the phones, I think we don't want them next to us on the bed. That's not good. Like I saw it was very interesting actually. I saw a study, it was actually a high school science project in Holland. These grade 9 students, they felt like, or they thought, their theory was that wireless routers maybe cause some problem with sleep, or they can be not a good effect on us. So what they did was they set up 2 rooms as more or less as identical as possible, and in one room they had 2 wireless routers and the other room none.
They had what?
Wireless router. And what they did was, in each room they put like a dish with like sprouts, that are germinating, seeds in the, you put seeds and they sprout, the sprouts. They put those seeds in dishes. One was right next to routers and one was in a room with no routers, and the results were like amazing. Like the no routers was green, healthy, and the other one they hardly sprouted, and they were like, I mean, it was really like a huge need. And it was just a science school project, and it was on social media, and some actual scientists commented saying, wow, this is really interesting. So, I mean, you don't want a wireless router next to your head in your bedroom. You do not want one of these things next to you when you sleep. If you need to have it on, put it in another room, or better switch it off at night. I mean, and now, this 5G is like, and of course you go somewhere and you put on your phone and there's like about 25 wireless signals, and you're thinking, what's going on around me? So this sort of thing, I think, can have a very negative effect. So, so I certainly recommend the last hour or two before bed is just get rid of technology. Okay, maybe we can leave it there. So, then just to finish, I'd like to first thank Dharma Friends for inviting me here to Israel and to setting up this 10-day retreat. In particular, I'd like to thank Yael for being the manager of the retreat, for Sippy leading the yoga sessions, and David for leading the guided meditations in the morning, and of course all the other volunteers behind the scenes who helped to set up and support this 10-day retreat. So thank you for all your efforts. And lastly, I'd like to thank all of you for coming here, making the time and effort to come here. I hope you got some benefit out of these 10 days, and if you did, then please don't leave it as some nice memory, but rather use it to further develop yourself as a person, to have a more rewarding life, and to also to help people around you, because the world needs a lot of help. So thank you very much.
I want to thank you from the deep of our heart. It really was very, very beneficial. It's very pity that you wasn't in the meetings that we had. Everybody mentioned how it was built and how it affects everybody, and it was wonderful. So thank you, and we hope that it will continue.
Yeah, I mean, normally I'll be coming again next year. I mean, we haven't set any dates yet, but probably around the same time. And hopefully I'll be here a bit longer next year, and maybe doing a 10-day retreat, and maybe a couple of weekend events as well. Normally I do that, but this year my schedule got cut down here. And next year's 10-day retreat will sort of build on this one, so we'll of course do Shamatha again, but next year I want to bring in more of Vipassana, some more days on Vipassana next year, so we're sort of moving in that direction, so it's planned for next year.
Thank you for your skillful mastery and your amazing capacity to bring very complex subjects. So I travelled quite far to be here, and I'm very grateful that I did. I'm very grateful to you for being such an inspiration.
Thank you.
So we all are. I would like to present this and thank you from everyone here for this beneficial, profound teaching. We are very looking forward to see you next year.
Looking forward to coming back, so thank you very much.
Thank you.
Do we want to do like a group picture or something somewhere? Maybe it's a bit tight in here. Maybe
Put it on Facebook.
Upstairs or outside, or
I think outside would be nice in the sun, no? Maybe
In the entrance, we're outside.
Yeah.
there where the flags are.
Yeah.
Let's go straight there now, otherwise
So let's do it.
let's do it now.
Shall I there?